Today I'm going to be talking with the director of a new Amazon movie that you can watch, you can rent or buy, called East Bay Confidential. This is a film noir movie, and I'm really excited to talk about film noir, about this movie in particular, about Westerns and cinema and all kinds of things, even literature and influences on the Troubadour channel. After World War II, something really changed in American cinema. The heroes became more morally ambiguous. The cities became darker and more corrupt. The endings stopped being clean and triumphant. European critics noticed this tonal shift and gave it the name film noir, which literally means black film or dark cinema. And Chris DePretis, who just directed East Bay Confidential, which is a film that I'm happy to say that I had a little teeny bit of a role in terms of being a script consultant many years ago. So I want to learn a little bit more about the script writing process too, perhaps. The movie is a modern film noir about a returning veteran, about suburban corruption, and the danger of appearances in contemporary America. So Chris, before we go to the theoretical realm, before we kind of, as you put it, geek out about film and film noir and gangster films and detective novels and yada, 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 I'd like you to give us the story of East Bay Confidential and why someone today who's busy, they got their phones to entertain them and they got all this stuff they could do. Why should they spend, I think it's $2.99 on Amazon to rent or $9.99 to buy? I recommend buying it. I bought it. So why should someone go buy this movie?
Well, first, Kirk, thank you, obviously, for hosting and having me here. It's great, of course, to talk with you. Here's the thing about a micro-budget film or micro-budget cinema generally, and why I would encourage the audience to explore kind of this level of production and this style of filmmaking, which is difficult, very different than what you see in the theaters, both in terms of the producing of a movie like East Bay, but also in how you ingest it, how you consume it. Micro-budget cinema is much closer to your experience on TikTok, I think, than it is to what you experience in a normal Hollywood movie. And certainly producing it, when we're out shooting, our crew and everything, we look a lot more, our impact, on set and everything looks a lot more like a little social media video than it does, a big Hollywood production. And I think, as far as that concerns the audience, how that relates is that if you enjoy what you see on TikTok or other social media channels, you're getting art, you're getting short form video that is direct from the artist, that is very unfiltered typically. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the Hollywood movie, which goes through so many, they are largely built by committee. Now, of course, there's great auteur directors who have a ton of power and make great movies. There's no question about that. But what a studio will greenlight and the process that a script goes through, the amount of eyes that it has to go through. And I think that what the general Hollywood movie that gets turned out, I think is much more a product of corporate interests, I suppose I would say, or it's a big business. Whereas when you look at micro budget filmmaking, you are looking at more singular visions of unique artists who have the only constraint is money, which is still a big constraint, but there's nobody telling us what stories you can tell or the way that you shoot it. And so you're going to see things in micro budget filmmaking that are, I think, a little more raw, certainly, perhaps less polished, but a little closer to the artist's intent, perhaps, than Hollywood might allow, unless you've got a big, a big household name. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So like the TikTok relationship's interesting. So it's basically an extended, in terms of, you're saying, production values. You're not going to see big explosions. You're not going to see a Brad Pitt actor commanding $30 million, that type of thing. You're not going to see that in a micro budget film.
Right.
But on the flip side, so like I see a lot of complaints today. I think they're ridiculous, actually. So I'm glad you brought it up. I see a lot of complaints about people, Hollywood's unoriginal, Hollywood XYZ, which is true. But the reason is because they spent $100 million on a product and they have to guarantee they get that money back, or they cannot do it again, right? You can't just keep flopping and losing hundreds of millions of dollars and expect to keep doing it. So that's why they use, now they're using video games, which I love. I hope they do Red Dead Redemption 2. Like they do all the, I like the Fallout series is fun. That's what they have to do. They have to take something that they have a very large confidence is going to make them money, a story that's going to make them money. Otherwise, they cannot spend that kind of money. It's just, no one's going to give you 100, 150. I think the Odyssey movie is like $250 million with the Christopher Nolan. I think that's what he spent on it, with something like that. It was like crazy. And you have to have all the big Hollywood names involved because they're all going to bring their people, their star power to come see it. So even if it flopped, it would still flop as in getting maybe $200 million, right? That's a flop for them, right? Yeah. At a micro budget, what you're getting are more original stories. You're getting, like you said, I think that's something that's a value is that, and this has been around for a while. These independent films allow filmmakers like nobody, maybe one or two producers who give them a certain amount of money might have some say in it, but it's not like this, like you're saying, this committee, they're incumbent to making sure they get their money's worth, essentially. So you get more unique stories you won't see in Hollywood very often. And I think that's I agree with you. That's a good reason to go see some micro budget films and just independent films generally, I think, which yours falls into, right? Yeah.
Totally. And, I will also, of course, say, I am a fan of Hollywood movies, and so that's not to knock them.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a wonderful level of quality that they provide. And that's something that's a trade-off with micro budget films, is you're looking at something that is put together by hand and with way fewer people. Like sometimes I get down on myself, but then I'll watch a movie and I'll just
look at the credits.
It's like
crazy.
I can't feel too bad. Exactly.
Yeah, it's like 9 minutes of credits on this film that I saw before, something like that. It was like ridiculous. And yeah, that's like full-time jobs for people for a year or whatever. Yeah, and you can't compare. But I like to know a little bit about the story itself, because there is something special about the story. We're not going to see it very often in a Hollywood film. Sure. There are some, I think, that are, might be touching on the same kind of style and genre and characters, but there's a lot of unique aspects to what you're doing that you're not going to see anywhere. And I know one off the top of my head that's really, really unique that I don't think anyone does in Hollywood or anywhere else. But I want to hear what you say first, and then I'll tell you my unique one after you.
Sure. Yeah. I think, probably some of the things that you're maybe less likely. So, the protagonist is a Iraq war veteran, and he's not presented necessarily as being like Hollywood's typical depiction of a veteran might be like the noble guy who's come home and maybe he's having a hard time. But this guy, he plays more of a loser.
A buddy from the old platoon freed up his couch while I sort things out. His little smoke show wife isn't thrilled with the setup. Between tiptoeing around her, holding down dog shit duty, and making deliveries all day, I've about reached the end of my rope.
And I think that, I wanted to reflect kind of, hey, a kid who just got out of the army and he's not squared away at the moment. He kind of stumbles into this sex trafficking plot that goes all the way up to the politicians local to the area, which is also, perhaps a little less large audience friendly. I think a studio is maybe less excited to greenlight something like that. And, it features characters, I think, that you maybe typically, I wouldn't say are never represented, but are less often given the spotlight. You've got the homeless veteran who's kind of a drunk and who's kind of a scumbag who's living under the bridge, for example. And then, I don't know if where you were going, but perhaps the social media influencer femme fatale, which is something, I think that's a character type that we all stare at every single day. You turn on
sure.
And it isn't always represented in movies, or at least not yet. But specifically, with that character, there is a duplicitousness to social media generally, not to call out influencers specifically, but just generally when we're on social media, we sort of create a face. And I felt like that fit well into noir. But generally, I think that the story, which is about the said veteran getting framed for murder and having to try to clear his name, is a gritty enough story, and a fairly pessimistic story that you don't see all the time, but at the same time, it's certainly not the first time that this one's been done, and it is, I mean, highly derivative of all the film noir movies that came before it in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I'm just sort of cherry picking a lot of my favorite um, moments and stuff from those old movies, and trying to have a chance to sort of play in that space myself.
Well, so I don't know if I think this comes up in film noir sometimes, but one of the things that I considered was unique about your film, especially today, is actually just the setting, right?
Mm.
Like you don't see a lot of movies that are getting into a grittier side of a suburban, what we would consider wealthy area.
Sure.
Like, I'm from Fremont. When I met you, I was living in Livermore. That's not a poor area in America, right? In general.
Right. Yeah.
It's like the housing price, like the reason we left was the housing prices are crazy. And I bought a house in Austin, for a fraction of what I would be able to buy it in California. So
Sure.
it's interesting to see a kind of, a veteran who's, coming back to a suburban area versus urban, which I think a lot of film noir comes out of an urban. It tends to take place in LA and Chicago, in New York City, where there's a much more, the moral ambiguity is clear in just in that world, that there's a lot of bad things happening. There's a lot of corruption in the city government, which you see in your film as well.
Yeah.
And you brought it, I don't know if you did this consciously, because I can't remember when you, I wish I remembered more about the script. I read it like 4 or 5 years ago. I think it was 2021. But but like, the relevance to Jeffrey Epstein is pretty clear. And, like in all the stuff that's happening with that scandal at the highest levels is very part of it. Maybe because there's always been scandals. So it's just, that's another one. So it fits into that genre. The unique thing that I saw was the setting of a kind of grittier side to the suburban world, which if you live in any, and not just suburban world, but that particular East Bay area, which is a big area. And there is a lot of, that around if you drive around, for sure. I think it's not everywhere, but it's there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on it. I mean, obviously you did it because you live there, but what do you think it adds to the film? Because I think it does. I think it's really interesting.
Well, I think that's right. So yeah, certainly, I live here, so that helps. But it was conscious, and it'll go back to something like, and now this is more of a neo noir, but I like, one of the movies that probably my favorite David Lynch movie is Blue Velvet.
Okay.
And the opening of that movie, which is so pretty, and there's white picket fences and roses, and the sprinklers happening, on the lawn, and he brings us into this beautiful suburban neighborhood and what seems like a typical suburban family. And then, of course, the plot starts moments later when, kind of in this same area, Kyle MacLachlan's character finds, a severed ear. And I kind of like, what David Lynch did there, where he, instead of permitting the suburbs to be a safe place or a safe haven away from the city, he suggests that the suburbs themselves are hiding something. And then in East Bay, so I took that, and in East Bay, and this is a very classic, I mean, as you know, this is a very classic noir theme, but there is this, and it's reflected in, in classical noir, duality is reflected in them using mirrors. You think Lady from Shanghai by the Orson Welles, Rita Hayworth movie, I think, is at the end they have all the mirrors and everything. And lots of these movies, Kubrick had this movie called Killer's Kiss, I think, Before the Killing, and same
Okay.
thing, lots
I
of
haven't seen
good
that
mirror.
one.
It's good. Yeah,
I've
it's
seen the
less.
Shanghai. I like that one. That's fun.
Yeah, that
That's a
one's
good
great.
one.
But
Yeah.
back in the day, it was like, hey, if there's a mirror and somebody's looking into it, it's kind of projecting this idea that they've got two faces.
Yes.
And so in East Bay, and without spoiling too much, I was interested in that idea, and I do want to get to a note that you had about the script. I'll arrive there, but
Okay.
there is this idea of everybody being two-faced, and the
Mhm.
deeper theme there is distrust, right? You can't trust anybody around you because you don't know who they are. So the main female protagonist is a character called Gladys, who was a former sex worker who's been kind of pressed by the FBI to go undercover in this trafficking ring and uncover their documents. Right, the logbook is sort of the movie's MacGuffin, and so she
Explain that
has
term. We've talked about this before, but
yeah,
we need to explain terms a little bit.
yeah, totally. It's the movie's Death Star plans, and it essentially it gives something of value to the characters that kind of moves the plot along. Um, and so for her character, for Gladys, she has two faces. She presents herself as one of the traffickers to the other
Mm,
traffickers, but
sure.
when in fact she is a mole and she is lying to them. Another example would be the congresswoman who is at the top of this crime ring, who on the news and on the podcasts that she is a guest on, she presents herself as this person, this altruistic person who's caring for veterans, who's caring for women who've experienced abuse, and who's caring for children.
Hmm.
When in fact, we end up learning that she is responsible for most of. She's kind of at the top of this crime ring. She's actually responsible for most of this stuff that's going on. So she's got her two faces. Same thing with the main news anchor. Again, he presents himself one way to the world via the news, and then a different way in real life. And even he even presents himself one certain way to his wife. We don't see those interactions, but we assume that the
Yeah.
affair that he's having is
That
kept
was a
secret.
good reveal. So yeah, hopefully people will go watch the movie now. I don't want to spoil too much, but
Sure.
there's a lot of like I did want to say something nice about like the filmmaking that you did was very like micro budget fine, but the plot, the way you revealed things was very professional in my opinion. Like
Okay.
you had a great sense of all the backstories going on, but it wasn't in your face and explaining everything. It just kind of was there. Sometimes something might reveal itself. And what you were just talking about, that was kind of shocking to me when he was outside the Vine Theater and you
Sure.
find out that was something secret about their relationship. I mean, maybe that was revealed earlier and I just missed it. But I didn't, the relationship wasn't like they sit in a room. I think this is, what like new directors might like. They're sitting in a room they're after making love or something and they just kind of talk about the relationship, right? And then
Right.
you learn what's going on. You kind of do a like I think that's why I think the film is worth for just any general audience watching. It's a very professional film, like and I thought the plot was great in the way that you did perspective in various ways, because it wasn't spelled out but it was very clear. So when I was watching it, I was like, oh, this is that person. Now we're seeing it in a different perspective, in terms of putting all the elements together and the revelations of the characters and, things like that. So,
Well,
yeah.
I appreciate that. I'll definitely credit, the script is the one thing that we could do that in theory we could do at the same level as any other movie that comes out of Hollywood or any other
Yeah,
place. I mean,
that's
there's a
true.
point of course
Yeah.
where but yeah, I mean, writing the script in theory we should be kind of at the highest level that we can be. And now that being said, I have finite script writing experience, and so what I found was the most helpful to me on the process was just finding a lot of readers.
Yeah.
And you'll see like the main kind of credit at the end of the
Yeah.
movie are script consultants, and
Yeah.
you were one of those. And actually I I I would talk to the crew a lot about you, Kirk, because I got a lot of good feedback from all the different from everybody, and that helped a lot. Just people poking holes and asking questions and whatnot. But I don't know if you remember, but your feedback was very key. Maybe the most, if not the most key feedback we got, which was have Miguel uncover the logbook. It wasn't originally, in an earlier
Oh,
draft,
okay.
it wasn't that way. And I mean, man, that sure helps
Yeah.
the, and so, I think with
I'll take
writing,
it. All right.
oh yeah,
That
no,
was a good
I mean,
one.
it was
Yeah.
yours. Yeah, it was great. And it
That's
helped
awesome.
motivate. Yeah, it helped
Yeah.
motivate the
Yeah.
characters. And the main thing is like, hey, there's some ideas that I'm curious to explore, and there's a style that I want to work in, but there's a lot to make in a movie. And even doing a script, it's like, hey, maybe I could imagine it 70% of the way there, but you
Yeah.
can't give the audience a 70% quality script. And to all the writers who are in your audience, having humility, and going to seek counsel from the people around you and just say, hey, how can this be better? What's wrong with this? And then, not do your best to swallow your pride. And it's like, hey, that person had a good idea. Let's get it in there. And it's
Yeah.
better. I mean, it's much better to get that feedback during the script writing process than to get that feedback, on an Amazon review after the movie's already out and there's nothing you can do about it anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, be careful with those reviews though. People do stupid reviews that aren't
Totally.
like they just review bomb and stuff. That's
Totally.
a whole, but I get what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, and I want to move into like what you think film noir is and like
Yeah.
look into that a little bit. But I guess the last thing is on what you just said is reading a lot about writers. And I've always been interested in how writers work. A writer I really love, and there's a great biography of him, is Henrik Ibsen.
Okay.
He's a Scandinavian playwright from the late 19th century. He wrote Enemy of the People, A Doll's House, things like that. Great playwright. And one of the things that I think differentiates a professional and a good and a great creator, especially in performing dramatic arts in particular, but really any art, and is you touched on it with the idea of a certain kind of humility, but it's not really a humility necessarily. Depends on the person, I think, but it's much more a real focus and a desire to make a product that an audience will be interested in, not just what you're like inside of yourself feels good.
Sure.
Like I've written a lot of stuff that when I look at it, I like, oh, I love it. It's the most great thing. But nobody gives a crap about it. It's terrible. It doesn't flow. I wish I would have learned this 20 years earlier or whatever, but I think there's just such a value of being obsessed with audience experience, how they're going to do it, which is one thing we dog on Hollywood, but the reality is they bring in audiences and they're obsessed with audiences. They do focus tests and they shouldn't do that, but it's like, that's how they make money and why they're so good at what they're doing. In a sense, we're mad at Hollywood, but they're also the best at what we want to do in a certain sense, which is a very, unlike even writing a novel, it's very expensive, time consuming, and it takes multiple people. So you need a kind of humility, but you also just need an obsessiveness with making a product that some people out there will be interested in, which means making it objective. And then with filmmaking, you have to use, multiple people's perspectives and learn from them. So I think that's a great tool. We can talk about this more later, but man, I think we're living in a great time to be independent artists. I really do. I really am seeing more and more opportunities for, I don't want to insult anybody, but like mid-range films and TV shows and things that can make money. Not
Sure.
millions, but can make good money and find an audience. I emailed this to you earlier, but like there's that great success with the movie Iron Lung on YouTube. And YouTube is providing tools for people, for creators to make films, and they do. Like I know a lot of like reactors, like I do reactions. A lot of reactors make little mini films and they get 10s, 20s, 100,000, views or whatever, and they get money on that. And that's a good thing. So,
Well, yeah, and I totally agree with that. I mean, it's certainly competitive in a different way right now, but the fact that anybody can, I mean, we made East Bay, if I can say it, we made East Bay for $3,600, and
that's
you know,
crazy. Good for
yeah,
you, man.
now, well,
Good for
and thanks to kind of the community that came around to that
Yeah.
would be locations that showed up and just said, yeah, film here and we won't charge you, or all the cast and crew who showed up because they wanted to be, because they wanted to create, and of course it'd be ideal to have a nice budget, but we do live in a time where we have the production tools, which are all very inexpensive and very easy to use, right? Like I can edit and but also direct, and it's nice that I don't, that editing is a fairly simple thing, today.
Yeah,
and
I'm actually
and,
editing now.
Yeah,
I've always
exactly.
hated editing, but I actually can do some edit. Like I went to film school like you, but you really you're good at editing. You're good at all these things. I've never really enjoyed it. I've always gotten other people to do it.
Sure,
but now I'm
sure.
like actually doing a little bit of editing. I'm like, oh, this is kind of fun. But anyway, continue.
Yeah. Well, and same thing goes for, distribution methods where we can put our content out there. And so I do agree. I think it is a great time to be an artist of any kind, whether you're a filmmaker or a musician or a writer, whatever you are, you can create and you can distribute. Now, there's a ton of noise, and trying to get a little bit of attention is the trick. And I think really understanding marketing and knowing how to market separates the winners from the losers, insofar as winning is finding your audience. And I think that I agree with you. I think we're making these things for an audience. There is also a little tension that I hold on the other end of the spectrum, which is the pleasure of self-expression. And of course, like with some of the stuff that you had mentioned that you wrote that you maybe found that others didn't relate to, you still got the joy of writing that. And
I'd like people to read it though.
I totally agree.
Especially now, like I'd prefer people read it. But I agree with you. Like there is something self-expression, and I think that's a whole interesting conversation. Since we're on the indie topic, I'm curious, do you think that there's something special about film noir in contemporary America today, or neo-noir?
Yeah.
Like, why did you choose this genre? And then I want to move into what the genre means a little bit broader, like what it comes from. It's a very unique, and I'm calling it a genre. A lot of people wouldn't even call it a genre. I actually don't think it's a genre. Let me just say that. In my film studies, I would not classify it as a genre. I am one of the people who would say it's much more a style with a couple of specific attributes that we could talk about. But because it's been so ubiquitously influential throughout so many different, different genres in general.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a kind of technical difference. But I'm just curious, I love
that conversation, by the way. And that is like that's like classic noir nerd convo, which is this a genre or is it an art movement or something? And I tend to agree with you. I think that it is not a genre because it seems to actually cross over genres. You see very noirish, we could talk Westerns at some point. You'll see very noirish Westerns like High Noon.
I was going to bring up High Noon. That's one of the ones I definitely want to talk about.
I can't wait to discuss it. But what I think is that I think it's probably, like you said, a style or an art movement that just so happened to mainly be localized on top of a genre that is the crime genre, but that's not exclusively. It covers other genres as well. It's
Yeah.
just that, and I think that's where it gets confusing, is that the crime genre kind of got the bulk of the noir style
Sure.
or whatever. And so then it can feel like, but I agree. I think it's more expansive than just over the crime genre for sure.
So, but why did you choose that genre or that style for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'd probably go backwards rather than saying, "Hey, I had this story. What's the style that makes the most sense to tell it?" Which that's probably a pretty logical way to go about this. I went the other way where it's like, "Hey, I love this style. I love this form of filmmaking, which is noir. What's a story I could tell so that I get to contribute and play in it?" I'd say that's the direction I went. And so, and I enjoy neo noir as much as the next person, but I am like a 1940s, 50s classic film noir super fan.
So we should define it real quick before you continue. I should have done this earlier. What do you
Sure.
think it is, really quickly? So with that, and then I want you to talk about why you chose it. So I don't want to not talk about that, but I think people need to grip onto what it is if they're not super familiar. Just briefly.
Yeah. So of course, there's there's kind of the iconography around noir, the visual style, the blinds, the smoke, the black and white, the shadows, and all that kind of stuff that you look at, you could just see in a picture and you'd say, "Oh, that's noirish." And then there's
it's satirized a lot. The blinds, especially.
Oh yeah,
in cartoons,
totally.
Family Guy, Simpsons, they've all done it. I think even in a film noir, like maybe a neo noir one, Chinatown. Is that neo, or do you think that's classic?
That's neo.
That's
Neo,
right?
neo-noir.
I think there's a line where he's like, "Don't eat the Venetian lines. I just put them up," or something like that.
Totally,
and it's just great because it's obviously a play on all the Venetian blinds in noir.
Woo. Oh.
All right, Curly, enough's enough. You can't eat the Venetian blinds. I just had them installed on Wednesday.
Yeah,
so it's got to have Venetian blinds. That's number one.
Yeah, all
it's
the
not
rain.
Noir.
Rain and smoke. So all that stuff is very noirish. Any noir fan, and this is what makes it fun, is it's not always cut and dry. But I think any noir fan loves to sit and then debate. Is what I just watched film noir? Now,
sure.
I'm kind of maybe scientific enough that I have like a number system that I like to apply to a movie, as to whether or not I think it fits. But at the core, though, what I think noir, or when I watch a movie and I say, "Boom, that's noir," is whether or not it uncovers or reveals themes related to human depravity. So this could be things like distrust or duplicitousness, which we discussed, or corruption or greed, all forms of selfishness, hunger for power or hunger for pleasure, but specifically where that hurts a person or hurts somebody else.
So, because that's an interesting thing to me, because to me that sounds a little too broad. Actually, when you say that, I think like, okay, Count of Monte Cristo. I think Don Quixote. I think like I even think of Antigone, in ancient Greek. Like to me, that's like covers like the covering or recovering of corruption in the city or in the location is a very broad literary artistic thing. So I do think that's there, but I feel like it might be a little too broad.
Yeah, I mean it is maybe more broad than some of the tighter conventions or tighter iconography.
Yeah.
But and I think it requires so this is where my number system comes in.
The number system is interesting. Yeah. I'd like to hear that.
So it requires a combination of everything. So here's where I go, because here's the thing is that you have some movies, take like Double Indemnity, right?
Okay. 1944, Double Indemnity, classic film noir.
And like the quintessential film
noir,
noir,
it's like,
right?
I think it's one of the ones that the French film criticist, I don't remember his name, that he named, oh, what are these dark films in film noir or whatever in French.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
that. It was like Maltese Falcon and like
Yeah.
one or two others at around that same time. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
So you would look at that movie and you would just say, yeah, this is film noir. There's no debate, right? This is just,
Yeah.
and so basically I have my number is, it's a 4-number system: 0, 1, 2, and 3. Before I define those, I'll say, I have sort of 3 categories that build up, that roughly build up a genre, which those categories being iconography, which are just the visual things that you could see. So like in the Western, it would be, tumbleweeds and horses and cowboy hats and
Yeah,
things
sure.
like that. It's like, yeah, very like you could just look at a one single frame and just those iconic images. It's like, yeah, this is a Western, right? And that's what makes the Western so great, is it's so well defined. And then conventions are on the lines in the script. So this is femme fatales and this is private eyes and stuff like that. And then the third category is kind of this deeper mythology, which I think it is what is read in between the lines of the story. And so this is all of those themes that I mentioned, especially these kind of themes of human depravity. So these are 3 distinct things that you'll find in these films. And then what I do, and this is keep in mind, this is a little bit of a work in progress, and I haven't tried it on. I'm maybe 150 movies into the classic film noir era, and I haven't tried it on all of them, but it's a rough method where basically, if you feature one of those 3, like if the film features one of those 3 category, or like it like tests positive for like one of those, say noir iconography, but not really the other 2 so much. And there are movies that are more hopeful, or maybe they don't feature the conventions. There may be melodramas versus crime films or something like that. Then I'll give you a 1, and 1 I would say, oh, this is noirish, right? It might not be full on film noir, but it's noirish. It's like getting into the space. And then if you feature 2 of those 3 ingredients, then I would say that you're like there's more comfortably an argument for you just being film noir. And then if you have feature all 3, and this is something like Double Indemnity, then you become like clearly 100% film noir. There's no question. There's not an argument as to whether or not that's film noir. And then on the other end of the spectrum, 0 is like Singing in the Rain. It just doesn't have any of those ideas necessarily.
Yeah.
But I do want to say you are 100% right. Human depravity, for example, that's generally present in anything where there is some conflict, right? I mean, there's some sort of
something's rotten in the state of Denmark.
Right, totally.
Hamlet, right? Like it's Shakespeare. That's a classic. That's a classic trope of. I think it's actually the origin of theater, and a lot of art. The Iliad starts with the plague. Like the origin of all Western literature, in a sense, is the disorder of the city, and the reorder, and what it takes to reorder it, or why it doesn't get reordered. And that I think is like one of the most broad archetypes that is like very part of our culture in the West. So it's So go ahead.
No, I think you're right. I think here's the difference is Singing in the Rain, which still features, greedy characters or lying characters, for example.
Yeah.
But I think the difference with that versus noir, and I'm picking on Singing in the Rain because it is one of my favorite movies of that era that's not noir.
It's beautiful. You can't watch it and not be happy, I think.
I totally
Especially
agree.
If you see it on a big screen with full color.
Yeah.
It's just makes you happy.
And funny enough, the last movie I watched before, we shot East Bay back February of 23. So just over 3 years ago. Last movie I watched before we started shooting was Singing in the Rain. And then in that scene that you mentioned earlier, where they're standing in front of the vine, just by luck, Singing of the Rain is on the marquee.
Oh, nice. I think I remember saying that. Yeah.
But the thing is that even though there's conflict in that movie and there's sinful humans in that movie, the general take of the film is that people are basically good. There are some rotten apples, like I forget her name, but there are some rotten apples, like the actress with the high voice. They will lose in the end. Truth will prevail. We'll find out who was really doing the singing is Debbie Reynolds, and and everything will turn out okay. Whereas when Noir exposes those same ideas, it seems to have a very different take, which is that actually not that it's the exception, but that it's the rule. Hey, this is what the world is like. And in the end, the evil sort of prevails, or at least doesn't fully get its comeuppance. Now, that's not all the time. Actually, a lot of times in classic Hollywood noir, they have happy endings, and it drives me crazy when they do, because it feels like they kind of negate like the whole rest of the movie, or the tone of the rest of the movie. But some of the best ones, just, and my personal favorite, and I know you and I have discussed this one, is The Sweet Smell of Success.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the end of that movie, Sidney Falco does kind of get his comeuppance, but it's such a bleak ending where everybody just seems to lose, and it's not unlike Sunset Boulevard or Double Indemnity, or Asphalt Jungle. Two good Sterling Hayden movies, Asphalt Jungle or The Killing. In both cases, where Sterling Hayden either ends up dead or ends up losing everything that he just fought for, and I think that is a point, that is a uniquely noir viewpoint. So to not just uncover uncover the what's wrong with the world, but to suggest that that's just the way that it is, and we won't triumph over it, almost, if that makes sense. Which is Bleak, right?
Sure. Yeah, and I want to talk about Westerns in a minute, but I want to stick on the film noir thing for a little bit more. So here's three characteristics of the noir that I found through some film historians that I like, actually.
Okay.
And I'd like to tell you what they are and see what you think about them. Archetypal characters, generally the PI, the femme fatale, the corrupt cop. Those are the three dominant ones.
Right.
High contrast aesthetics. If you look at the movie Sin City, that like takes that to an extreme almost, where it's like extremely high contrast. But that's where the light and dark comes into play. That's where the foggy backgrounds, and then complex stories with unhappy endings. And, on the unhappy ending, I don't think the unhappy ending means the hero dies always, but just that there's a kind of dissatisfaction involved in it.
Yeah.
He could, like Chinatown, cause it's on the top of my head. The protagonist, he wins in the sense of solving the case, right? He figures out what's going on, and there's kind of some kind of justice in a way, but the last line is, I think it's the last line, or one of the last lines is like, because there's nothing he could do about it. It's like, well, this is Chinatown. Right?
You want to do your partner a big favor? Take him home. Take him home! Just get him the hell out of here! Go home, Jake. I'm doing you a favor.
Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown.
And that's a great, I think that's a great line for a noir, of just the idea of like, there's only so much you can do, right? You can't take it all the way to completely, resurfacing morale or order perfectly. It's always going to be tainted, and there's going to be destruction, and people are going to be torn down. Their self will be completely torn apart.
Yep.
So I think those are the three things that make the most sense to me, as it's because it's like a school. I do think of it more of a school, like an artistic school, like expressionism or something, or Baroque, where it's not specifically a feeling. It is a kind of, like you were saying, there's maybe even you could identify it in a couple ways by a point system. But yeah, what do you think of those three? So archetypal characters, high contrast aesthetics, and complex stories. So like a story that's not a simple narrative with a simple beginning, middle, and end, but could jump all over. Like Memento is perfect in that sense. That's definitely neo-noir. Because and it's, to me, that's like I love that movie. Anyway,
I,
Dark
I
Knight,
totally,
right?
yeah, no, the Dark Knight's very noirish. Well, that's the cool thing. So I totally agree with those, and I think those line up. I think the high contrast thing is kind of lines up with the iconography and the other part, the conventions, and then the last part. I agree with the uh, unsatisfying endings totally, and I think those definitions are great. I think they also, I think it all allows room for there to be movies that are more and less noirish than one another. I don't see it as a like fun, ironically, I don't see it as totally black and white. Like there are some movies that are certainly not, some movies that certainly are, and then of course some movies that are like, yeah, this is pretty noirish. We I don't know if he hosts it in Austin or not, but Eddie Moeller, who is the czar of noir, he's he hosts Noir Alley on Turner Classic Movies, and every year he tours a film festival around the country called Noir City, and he's Bay Area based, so he starts in Oakland, and then he goes like up to Seattle each year if I can, and we pile into an old movie theater with a couple hundred noir fans, and then he proceeds to pick some obscure movie that only Eddie Moeller would know about, and and then it's always fun to. Yeah. And it's always fun to join in the conversation in the lobby afterward where all these noir nerds kind of bicker about whether or not that counts as film noir.
Is that really film noir? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. And I think well, some movies just are noirish. Maybe they don't, maybe they don't hit all the, but you mentioned Dark Knight and you mentioned Memento. And I think this is, for your audience members who are interested in like, hey, why should you watch some old 40s, 50s Humphrey Bogart black and white golden age movies before films had MPAA ratings, and when it was a whole different style of filmmaking, before realism came into cinema largely, and why should they watch these old movies? And I think that if for no other reason, I mean, I find them very, very enjoyable, but if for no other reason, noir, the classic film noir are the roots that grew into the tree that we all sit on today. And so something like The Dark Knight, and Christopher Nolan is a great example because his very first movie, Following, is a micro budget noir, which is excellent and very superior, very great, but very made on a very small budget. And then he goes and does Memento, which is a great neo noir, and then the Dark Knight trilogy is very noirish, and you see essentially the downstream effects of that, what happened in Hollywood in the 40s and 50s today, all over the place. It is in how movies are styled. It is in the kind of stories that are told, the kind of archetypes that still continue, the kind of anti-heroes and the femme fatales and everything. You can understand and appreciate a Batman movie like The Dark Knight a little bit more when you know who its great-grandfather is, and that its great-grandfather is a part of this, old style of film noir, and all your favorite directors, whether it's Coppola or Scorsese or Spielberg or whoever, all the people, Tarantino, exactly. All these guys, their careers would look entirely different if film noir had never existed. I can't even imagine what movies would look like if we didn't have those. I don't know how many there are. Some people estimate maybe 600 movies made between 1940 and 1958 or 59 that constitute film noir. Without that chunk of movies, today looks entirely different. But when you do watch, and I know, Kirk, you watch and study that era, it informs so much of what we see today. I mean, I'd have to ask you, because I think you've put a lot more thought than I have into the various canons that exist. But I'd have to ask you, to me, I like seeing the origins of everything, and there's I get a pleasure of, he's referencing, you mentioned Tarantino, Pulp Fiction. Hey, he's referencing Kiss Me Deadly. and with the briefcase. But for you, I mean, what is your top benefit of understanding the canon and its impact on what we consume today?
Well,
Does that question make sense?
yeah. Like I think so when I experience a story, I think there's just the pure artistic. I want to enjoy a good story. In a sense, I don't care where it comes from. Like I just want to be transported. I want to meet people that I'm interested in meeting, see something that I'm interested in seeing, maybe understand myself and things a little bit broader. Then there is the category of what I would think of as like the cultural historian category of myself, which is, the way I put it is there's a poem, Laws of Gods and Men, Houseman, I think. Is that Houseman? Anyway, where he has a line like, I, a stranger and afraid in a world I never made. And I always think of that as like how we're all born as humans. We're born into this world where the moral values, the iconography that you're mentioning, like why are Americans so obsessed with guns, right? Like there's something about that. Why do we look at love and relationships in the way that we do, which is very different than if you go to India. It's very different than if you go to Asian cultures. It's just different. Why do we experience friendships in the way we do? Why do we hold law in a certain way that we do? Like there's so many values that we take for granted that we have been born into. Even just the stories we were told as little kids when we were 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, the fairy tales were like this creates a part of our soul before we have conscious effort into it. And so for me, a big value, and it's an education one, but it's a self-education one. It's not what I would think of as like museum education, which is, oh, you line up to this museum because that's what you're supposed to do to be a good citizen. It's like, no, I don't understand why I am attracted to this kind of value in the world. When I see someone saying something about, I don't know, marriage or something in a certain way, I like, oh yeah, that sounds good to me. But why? Because other places they have multiple wives. Why is that not the right way? You know what I mean? Like, right. And so there's a deeper cultural philosophical approach of trying to understand the values I come from and why they're good or bad or not. Why, and so there's that part of it. And then there's just the framing of exploring these different types of models of living and morality. And film noir is interesting in that because so again, I think of film noir not as a genre, but as a style, as an artistic school that has, to me, it's more like the German expressionism of the 20s and 30s coming to America as these Europeans flee from Europe. And that influences on the particular interesting stories that Americans were interested in. But now it's starting to be told through the lens of this unique style that came out of Europe. And it's kind of just melding of things like that. My point of saying that is that it's a broader situation in terms of what its influence is. So I think of the influences as going all the way back. Like I mentioned Don Quixote, there's Picaro novels, there's like Moll Flanders, an English novel. Like there's all these stories that explore the moral ambiguity in our souls and the grayness and what's good or bad and how we make those decisions. How do we keep upright in an immoral world, right? Or in a world where we may be surrounded by corruption. And I just saw, I actually had never seen this, but I wanted to include it in my classic. I'm doing a course on classic Westerns, and I actually never saw this one, and I should have, but it's called The Virginian with Gary Cooper in 1929. And It's the first talkie in Westerns. It's a very important Western film, and it's based on, I don't have the book here, but it's in this book series, Classic Westerns. Owen Wister wrote a novel, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, called The Virginia. This is where we get all the tropes of the Virginian, of the Western hero in America. But when I was watching it, I was like, it's pre-Hays Code. It's 1929. The Hays Code is 34 to 68. And he is a straightforward hero, the Gary Cooper character, the the main, cowboy guy. But there was like some interesting moral ambiguities. Like he lies a couple times. Like he's not, so he lies to try to, win the girl a little bit. He's competing with his friend, and there's a kind of moral character. But there's like things that he does that's really like, what? Like that's not a cool thing to do. And it's not something that I think what we would think of as like the upright hero who just never does wrong would do. Now,
Sure.
In the end, when there's a big moral crisis, which is cattle rustling, and he has to, so he finds out that his friend is cattle rustling. He has to, I'm going to spoil this. He has to decide if he's going to hang his friend. And he does, because you have to have order and law on the frontier. Otherwise everything collapses, right? So he does. But I still thought it was like, wow, this is not as morally or as clear as you would think. And there's a very famous line in the book that made it into the movie. And I think it's a line that makes Gary Cooper a great, a star. It's like a Star is Born moment. And and the line is so, I already spoiled it. It's so film noirish. It's interesting. And it's smile when you call me that. And so like this guy is threatening him, and he's all playful, and then he's like, smile when you call me that. Right. And he does it so much better than I do. I can't do it. But the point is that there is that like element that's in film noir, that's in the crime, in the PI, and all these genres of the man who's going to bring order. And if we want to have an ordered society, that's not anarchy, but he is dangerous, and he is on the border of immorality, right? He's on the borderline of, because he has to take life. He has to kill somebody to do it. And, so to bring it back to your film, your film is maybe a little bit more about the film noir, about why you chose it. It's about a veteran. You're a veteran. You were in Iraq, right?
Yep.
And so, this story of this character, this hero who's gone through something very young. As you mentioned, he probably comes from a poor part of town, but he goes off, he's taken care of in a sense, but he fights, he works, and then he comes home and doesn't know what to do with that part of himself. That story is an ancient one. It's an important one. And film noir does something interesting, because many of the classic Westerns, which we could talk about in a minute, like, especially in the early days, they would often make it where he would basically come in, he would have a little bit of a grappling with it, but the woman would win him over. Could always be a woman. Dodge City is a great example, 1939. Because he'd be reluctant to use his gun because he doesn't want to take life. He's very morally torn. Then he sees that there's a corruption, that only he can do it. Then he takes life, and then he runs away. He leaves. And that's an important part of the early stories, is that he can't stick around. He can't enjoy the civilization because he's the man with the gun. The film noir, now that changes in Westerns as Westerns kind of go. They almost have again, I think the genres mix each other. So you have film noir philosophically influencing the Western. But anyway, so I found that interesting about your story as well, about this veteran coming home, dealing with all of these issues.
Yeah. And that particular, I think a little bit there is, an effort to, create a little bit of appearance of truth, right? Kind of a little verisimilitude where any part of my own experience that I could put into the movie, and, what limited experience I have, to kind of give it a sense of feeling, because I am not involved in these crime schemes, or have never been.
That's what a crime scheme person would say.
That's right.
Crime lord would say.
I've never had to clear my name of murder or anything like that. But so I think in part, writing him as a veteran, there was a piece of me where it's just, hey, this is the part that I do know about this guy. And there was also just something wanting to get some stuff off my chest a little bit, or hey, there's an identity crisis, I think, and noir focuses a lot on identity, and again, sure, going back to that duality idea and the idea of these suburbs. The identity of the suburbs is that they're clean and safe, and And then the duality of it is that, hey, bad stuff still goes on in the suburbs. There's still sketchy stuff happening. And I think that specifically with veterans, and there's a number of good classic film noir movies that whose protagonists are veterans. Dead Reckoning being one of them, or Blue Dahlia with Alan Ladd, or Ride the Pink Horse that's Robert Montgomery.
Okay.
And then, of course, and maybe more famous, In a Lonely Place, starring Bogart. That's Nick Ray did that one, and Gloria Graham is the lady of that movie. But what I found, you come home and you're right. I was young. I got out of the, I got back from Iraq and out of the army before I was even 21.
Really?
Yeah, I was like 17, 18, 19, 20 or
you went when you were 17 years old? I mean, you joined?
I signed my papers when I was 17, so my dad had to, co-sign.
Wow.
But to be fair, I didn't ship out until, like maybe a month after my 18th birthday or something like that. But I think it all.
So that's 4 years, because it's usually 4 years. So 18, 19, 20, 21. Yeah.
Yeah. And technically I did. So I got out maybe 4 months before I turned 21. And I think technically I did 3 years. But the thing is that you deal with some identity issues. When you're in the service, whichever branch, that's who you are, and they drill it into you. You're a Marine, you're a soldier, you're a sailor, you're an airman, and you know what your job is, and you know what your mission is. It's always very clear because it's screamed at to you every single day. Sure. And if you veer to the left or to the right, you know it. Yeah. And if you're wrong, and so, you know who you are while you have your uniform on, but it is, and the other thing is, people know who you are when you have your uniform. People come up to you and they shake your hand. They're very kind and everything. And then you get out, you come home, you get out, and then there is this big identity crisis that I do see reflected in some of those movies that I mentioned, but that I also felt personally, where it's like, man, I don't know who I am anymore. I'm not a soldier. So what am I? And it takes you a while to get into work, and maybe you're going through school or whatever it is. And there's a period where you're, struggling financially and just trying to figure life out, because you're 20 or 21 or 22, you're a kid, just like everybody else. And so I think I was interested in looking at the main character, who's called Miguel, exploring the the identity of that person, because that's something that I struggled with for a long time, and then, of course, the more on the nose fact is that throughout the film, lots of characters have identities that may or may not be who they really are, right? The influencer is one person to her social media audience and somebody else to the world. And she is one person to Miguel when she meets him in the bar, and then she turns out to be somebody else. And so identity generally is a delicate thing, and what any person ties their identity to, or how they choose to see themselves, has big consequences. It matters a lot. I lived in LA for a period of time, and for whatever reason, like, really tied Los Angeles to who I was. Like, I was just like, it tied. And then when I moved, once again, I found myself like struggling. All right, well, like, if I'm not a guy who lives off Wilshire, then who am I? And so that was something that I don't have an answer for necessarily, but was interested in exploring specifically with that character. And I think making him a veteran, tied back to the World War II era film noir characters who are World War II veterans, but also felt personal, and was something that I was able to, relate to pretty deeply while I was writing it.
Yeah, and I think that the film noir style comes out of, I think, all these German expressionists, Fritz Lang in particular, in my view, he's very, I like him, but them coming over to America and having those influences, but then also just the reason it was successful, I think, was it was tapping into a feeling many young men in particular were feeling at that time, coming home from a war where you had a very specific mission, you knew exactly what you were doing, you're a hero, and then you come home, and the hero thing kind of fades, I think, over pretty quickly. Right. It's like you're a hero first, and then it's like, yeah, get to work, dude. All right. We're over it. Right. It's like, we're not going to do this forever. And it's, I never went to the military, but I can imagine that being a really, structurally complicated situation in a person's life. In terms of just figuring out what to do next. And the film noir, I think, dies in a sense, like it becomes neo-noir later around the Vietnam era more, right? Like I think before, but I think because the moral ambiguity is much more felt by everyone. And the things that you're talking about, like when you say you came home and people were nice when you're in your uniform, that's not the experience that many men at that time felt, right? Many soldiers. So I think a noir that, I think that feeling probably just expressed itself in all kinds of genres at the time. I don't have anything prepared exactly other than the Western True Grit, which I think is a really interesting example where the main, this John Wayne, the main character who's supposed to represent America, like that's especially at this point, like it's John Wayne, who is America in a sense, to at home and abroad, but he's a drunk who doesn't take action. He just doesn't care anymore. He's done. And I think a lot of Americans felt that way. A lot of soldiers felt that way. They're like, to hell with you. And it takes a little girl to bring his morality back, essentially. And that's it's she's the moral center that gives him that oomph to keep going.
Yeah.
So anyway, my point is that, we're probably back a little bit more. We have we at least are conscious of a meaning crisis today. A lot of young men don't know what to do, not just soldiers. Just a lot of young men don't know what to do with themselves, how to act, what to do. And I think that this kind of story, it doesn't give them a guidance, as you, I think, alluded to, but it at least experience or shows them that that's a real thing that exists in the world, that feeling is real. And
totally. Hopefully something that they could relate to, or at least be aware that they're not feeling it uniquely, or they're not alone. Like, hey, this is a shared experience. And you're 100% right. It's definitely not unique to veterans. It's especially like you said, to young men. Who am I and what am I here for? And you look to society for at least some guidance, right? Maybe as how you compose yourself and how you work and all of that kind of stuff. So I will also say, something veteran wise that I tried to do in the movie was kind of create a little bit of I tried to be fair. The Miguel character, the protagonist, he's on the fence. He sleeps on a couch. He's not quite got everything together, but he also hasn't gone off the deep end. And he kind of experiences with two of his fellow veteran buddies who live in the area, kind of a devil and angel on his shoulder, or two different directions he could go. Yeah. So there's the guy whose couch he's sleeping on, who's called Jay. And this is a guy, this guy has a wife. He must have a job. He's got a home. We don't know a ton about him, but he seems that he has come home and is fine. Or good enough. He's healing and he's moving forward with his life, and he's even trying to help create a space for Miguel. And then on the other end, there's another character who is another veteran from the platoon who's homeless, living in an encampment down in a flood channel under a bridge, who's determined that he's worked enough and now is his time to drink and forget, essentially. And it kind of creates these two paths that Miguel can, will inevitably go down. He'll either, get his life together, or he won't. And so I wanted to kind of have a few options in there. Also, side note, the Dassin character is named for Jules Dassin, the film noir director, and actually that's throughout the movie. There's a lot of instances of characters,
Easter
named,
eggs.
little things like that. But I would also go back to something too that you said that I agree with. I think film noir does probably end there in the early 60s, because I agree it did seem to permeate into some of those some of that ideology did seem to permeate into all other genres and styles of filmmaking and storytelling, and maybe to some extent the kind of pure noir lost its purpose. It no longer needed to be the dumping ground for these ideas, because they appeared everywhere else, and outside of film culturally. That kind of, I think, became maybe more prevalent with, like what you're saying, all the tumult and everything from the 60s. Maybe you don't need film noir. It served its purpose, and then you're right. Eventually, it comes back as neo noir, but neo noir is such an expansive kind of genre itself. It's much, I think, harder to pin down.
It's almost like spaghetti westerns in a certain sense. Like it's almost like it's paying an homage to a genre, but part of what makes the so if film noir is a genre, it's a genre within this one framework, this historical moment. Mm-hmm. And part of what it is capturing something, the underbelly of something that people aren't expressing in any other way. Right. So there's no expression of the corruption that's felt, the worries, the anxieties in this Leave It to Beaver era, and that everything's great. But then you have these dark as hell things that happen. Now, I want to bring it a little bit to the Western because I'm doing the course, but I also think that the Western is the what I think of as the dominating genre within American cinema. Like Agreed. It is the framework. I mean, what the first movie and the first narrative is The Great Train Robbery, which is a film. And then you have, of course, D.W. Griffith, who does all kinds of things with The Birth of the Nation, which isn't exactly Western, but it's got some of the, anyway, it's so ubiquitous and part of our culture. Even if we don't have horses, it's part of it. So the best example is just how action movies, maybe up until recently, but even recently, like the idea that the hero always knows the right moral action to take when he uses his gun, and it's pretty clear. If you read European literature, all quiet on the Western front, but just European stories in general, like Victor Hugo in the 19th century, Count of Monte Cristo, there's so much time spent deliberating on what the right choice is. And we don't have that in America. In America, there's a little bit of time, but it's really like, should I use violence for it? But the moral sentiment of who's the good guy and the bad guy is pretty clear. And I love like the 90s. I grew up in the 90s. I think you and I are similar. You might be a few years younger than me, right?
I was born in 88.
Yeah. So yeah. So like, I always think of Jean-Claude Van Damme as like, he walks into a saloon, a guy, the drunken bad guy is grepping the butt of the waitress, and then he scissor kicks him in the face. Like, that is the American story of like, we know what the evil is and we just take it out. Right? Sure. Which is interesting because if you listen to the language today of Pete Hegseth, he's bringing a lot of that back. I don't, whether you agree with him or not, but he's very much saying like, here's the bad guys, we're doing it, which for a long time we had lost some of that language. And,
interesting.
But anyway, the point is, so I think High Noon is a good, you mentioned this earlier.
Yeah.
I think it's a good example of film noir or the philosophy underpinning film noir, the anxieties of it, entering more into the Western genre.
Right.
And because and you see this in other places, like the Oxbow incident is a great example with Henry Fonda. If you haven't seen that, where it's like, is he doing the right thing? Is this the right way to hang? It's basically about a posse that hangs a group of people. Did they really do it? Like, is he doing the right thing? And he's conflicted. And, I think that's 1943. And so again, the film noir is already a part of the conversation, or about to be in a big way. It's not named yet, but I think the same anxieties are making their way into the most popular genre. So, I mean, this is a genre that up until like 1950, I think it was something like 25-30% of all films in America were just Westerns.
Sure.
So it's huge and huge. But High Noon is, you have this corrupted city, and then you have nobody helping him. And he's even conflicted if he should do it.
Yeah.
Which is take out all these bad guys. But he does it anyway. And then there's, not necessarily the easiest happy consequences, although I do think it has a kind of happy ending. But anyway, I just thought if you had any thoughts on the Western and its influences on noir and vice versa.
Oh yeah, I totally do. And you are the Western guy. I love talking Westerns with you. I love your Western knowledge. So I do want to run some ideas past you, but on High Noon, separate from the rest of the Western genre, does feel totally noirish. Just in that how it paints the world at whole. Hey, the world, people generally, the movie suggests, are cowards and looking out for themselves. And they're not going to stick their neck out for what is good unless you're Gary Cooper. And yeah, I mean, it's a fabulous story. I will say, spoiler, but we're certainly allowed to spoil High Noon at this point. I'm sure.
I think spoiler. I'll just put a disclaimer, like spoilers throughout. So just get ready.
Yeah. But when Grace, the moment in that movie that's really so wonderful is, Grace Kelly, she doesn't want him doing this. Hey, let's get out of here. If you do this, I'm leaving you. And she's not happy about it either.
Yeah.
And she has the talk. I forget what the other actress's name is or what the character's name is, Esmeralda or something like that. Great character, but his Gary Cooper's like former lover, who is now sort of with is it Lloyd Bridges?
Yes. Yeah.
And that woman she goes, hey, if he was my man, I'd be there with a gun, myself or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then right. The moment that in High Noon that I just love is when Grace Kelly does herself make that decision when she arcs and she fires the gun and kills one of the guys. And it's a great moment because, Gary Cooper, his character, he is conflicted and he is afraid and his fear is excellent. And I think portrayed excellently. Right. I mean, I'm glad he's not, I'm glad he doesn't go throughout that movie thinking like nonchalantly or not being, I'm glad he's afraid because that's what makes him courageous. But he basically knows what he's going to do. The fact that she pulls the trigger means he got to somebody, right? Somebody, he kind of wins somebody over to his cause. And I do think, you mentioned the end. Yeah, I do think there is something hopeful about that ending that's really wonderful. And just a great, just a great movie overall. Here's some ideas though, separate from High Noon, looking more at more classical kind of Western ideas. Okay. Tell me what you think. I think that Westerns and film noir pair very well together. Yeah. I think they're complementary. But a lot of times because they do the exact opposite thing. And so they highlight each other's differences so well. So for example, there's this generally just, again, going to iconography, the look of the Western, big open spaces, right? You see these big empty landscapes that are really beautiful. John Ford knew how to shoot these great, plains and mesas and mountains and everything, and they're really gorgeous. And then on the other hand, film noir takes place cramped within the little lower alleyways of cities of New York or San Francisco or LA, where you're down at the bottom. It's the exact opposite of an open space. The characters, it's claustrophobic. Those blinds create jail cells around the characters. I love the Robert Aldrich movie. Aldrich is another character that's a name I used in East Bay for actually the main villain. But the Robert Aldrich movie, Kiss Me Deadly, which I know you and I have seen together. Great scenes where the Mike Hammer character
that's my favorite.
Yeah, and he's trekking through the maze of a 1950s Bunker Hill in downtown Los Angeles, which doesn't exist anymore, but he's trekking through the maze of these old homes, and I tried to do a similar thing in East Bay, actually, where he's going from parking garages to closed bars to under, like I said, encampments under bridges or train stations or wherever he is. But the film noir creates a claustrophobic labyrinth within the city, which is the exact opposite of the Western. Has this big expansive, there's this opportunity, there's places you could go. In the film noir, you are trapped. And then to take it a step further thematically, it seems to me that frequently it's the duty of the man in the Western to tame the West, right? He's got to fight as the Western portrays it, the savage, or he's got to fight the beasts out there, whatever. He's got to fight the criminals. He's got to go out there and kind of exert his good morality on the world and like tame it like you would break a horse or something like that. And so it's the man over the space or over the location, and it seems to be the exact opposite in film noir, where the city has the corrupting influence on the individual person. It's the person, the private eye doesn't come in and clean up the city. It's instead that the city has corrupted the private eye. It's turned him into whether he's an adulterer or a drunk or whatever he is, he's tempted into crime. He's tempted to go after the insurance policy and kill the guy or whatever it is. And it seems like the location, instead of being tamed by the man, is corrupting the man. And then finally, then you have this idea in the Western that, hey, institutions need to be built. Right. You need to have, like you mentioned, you need to have law and order. You need to have a sheriff come into this town and get rid of like these like corrupt kind of this like gang that's controlling the town or whatever. You need police, you need courts of law, you need these different things to tame the West, to make it a safe place to raise a family, to have a wife and children. And then in the film noir, it's the institutions, not that need to be built up, but when you watch enough of these movies, you end up kind of feeling in your gut like, man, these institutions need to be torn down. The media guys are corrupt and using their power, for gain, like in Sweet Smell of Success, or you'll see the police stations are corrupt, or you'll see the politicians are corrupt. The institutions are called into question, and instead of being the answer, they are the problem themselves. And then even right down to the female characters. And of course there's exceptions, lots of exceptions, but in the Western, frequently that is where you get the great and the classic damsel in distress, right? You get a woman who needs saving, right? And who's worth saving. She's got a ton of value. She is worth all of this effort. And in the film noir, you get the femme fatale. She is this wily woman who, she might present herself as needing saving, but she is there to corrupt and then turn on the protagonist for her own gain. And of course, in East Bay, I did go out of my way to create as nasty a femme fatale as I could, who, I guess I shouldn't spoil her ending, but
don't spoil that.
But I tried to make her as heartless, even to the people who she should love, as possible. And so those, that's a handful. That's a handful of ideas. I'm not saying that they are always, one is always the antithesis to the other, but I do think that there are lots of moments, lots of ideas that the Western promotes that appear in the exact opposite way in the film noir. And it makes watching those movies back to back, if you pop on a Western and then pop on a noir and you kind of rotate back to back, I actually think it's a lot of fun because you get such like a diverse, range of philosophy. You get actually just two opposite kind of philosophies hitting you back and forth. And the thing is that they're both very American. The Western is the great American genre. I agree with that. Film noir is not. But film noir, as you mentioned, the Europeans viewed what was happening in America once the embargo was lifted and all these films suddenly got to France, and they're like, holy smokes, what are the Americans going through? And so it's interesting to see kind of
What are the Americans going through?
two sides of the American psyche, two ends of this spectrum. That's how I see the two genres together. Tell me what you think, or if that plays, but I think they work well together.
Yeah, I mean, it's always important to remember that they, in a certain way, come out of the same system, right? They come out of the same storytelling system, which is American cinema. And you could take a broader perspective and take a step back. And I think there's, a cultural there's a mythology of America that precedes the cinema that then becomes translated into cinematic terms. And cinematic directors, like you mentioned, Tom Ford, they, I think, put a lot of the iconography, the imagery of it. You have also Fritz Lang does stuff with sci-fi that's still part of the culture. I mean, that's the imagery that we have today comes from a lot of this era. And I think that the Western genre holds all the things you mentioned, actually, in terms of there are stories of the corruption of the city. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is a great example of that kind of ambiguity and dealing with it. High Noon as well. They both come out of this storytelling mode in America, which is coming from very intelligent people with lots of talent and a studio system that's trying to attract a mass audience. The biggest philosophical thematic similarity, or is what you're saying that I agree with, is this polar opposite type of way to tell stories. So I think there are limits to how you could tell a story about the corruption of a city when it's on the frontier, right? It's just you're not capable. It just doesn't make as much sense. But when you're in, like you're saying, because the question always is in a Western, like, just go west, like just leave, go somewhere else. And, they have all those open ranges. So why deal with all this corruption and evil and people, dipsomaniacs and drug addicts and just all horrible things that people deal with in big cities? Why deal with that? Just if Dodge City is doing that, you could just leave. And some people do. But then the question of Dodge City is, well, how do you get it to a place where it can grow? And you see this in Tombstone, like one of the first, and this is a later Western, of course, but one of the first actions of the Western hero in that sense is he comes in and he cleans out a hotel. He like slaps around Billy Bob Thornton's character, and he's like, "Make a move, son!" Like, so that's the deep underlying thematic question of all these films at their best. And I, for instance, don't think of Westerns as primarily, they have a horse, they have the tumbleweeds and a 6-shooter or something like that. I think it's much broader than that. It's about the moral questions that happen when you don't have any institutions and you're on the edge of civilizations and savagery. So that's why, Star Trek is a Western in space kind of thing, because and you're dealing with how do you handle those questions when you're on the frontier? It's the last frontier, and that's Star Wars is not, because Star Wars is more like a space opera. I agree with that idea, and it's more almost like a Lord of the Rings type mythical, good and evil type of story. Whereas, again, the question that Americans have dealt with since we moved here, since Europeans began coming to the continent, is how do you develop a civilized culture? How do you deal with the natives? How do you make a home in a savage land where everything and everyone wants to kill you, basically?
Right.
And then how do you use force and violence to generate that? Because you do need violence. If you don't use the violence yourself, someone else will, right?
Sure.
That's the Western story. That's the High Noon story, where someone's going to do it. They threaten Kane, the marshal. He's got to figure out what he's going to do. He goes for help from all the people around him, and nobody in the city or the town is going to help him. So he has to do it alone. And this is kind of the underlying mythology of the American hero taking on that action to clean the moral corruption of the world.
Yeah.
But he has to do it with the gun, right? And again, I have to just bring up, just because we're dealing with it, that's a lot of the language being used today. And they used it in the war that just got started a few days ago. And that's been, America has used that language a lot. If you listen to, there's a speech by John F. Kennedy called the Frontier Speech.
But the new frontier of which I speak is not a set of promises. It is a set of challenges. It sums up not what I intend to offer to the American people, but what I intend to ask of them. It appeals to their pride. It appeals to our pride, not our security. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. The new frontier is here, whether we seek it or not. Beyond that frontier are uncharted areas of science and space, unsolved problems of peace and war, unconquered province of ignorance and prejudice, unanswered questions of poverty and surplus. It would be easier to shrink from that new frontier, to look to the safe mediocrity of the past, to be lulled by good intentions and high rhetoric, and those who prefer that course should not vote for me or the Democratic Party.
It's one of his big speeches at the Democratic Party, and he talks about the frontier, and the idea is that it's like, we need a new great adventure. We are the great policeman type thing. And we have to do the right thing and help people who need help. And that idea comes from this idea that we clean out the savages and the uncivilized. And now when you watch a movie like Searchers, John Ford, which is probably the greatest of all the Western stories, it really explores the moral ambiguity of that problem of like, well, how do you know you're correct? What if that person's not a savage, right? What if they're human and like you treat them like a human? Because if you have that mentality that these are savages and we're the good people, then you can just murder and slaughter everybody, right? That's a big part of the challenge that has to do it. Now the noir, I think, like you're saying, does take that question, and not just the noir. I would say the gangster film broadly, the crime film, the Jesse James outlaw story with Henry Fonda, which is about the big bankers and train companies coming in and immorally pushing his mother off the grounds, off her own home, through, I think they use eminent domain in that story. And that corruption leads them to attack the train in specific. And, you know, the Scarface, not just the new one, but the original one in the 1930s, and there was like a crime wave during Prohibition that actually gave rise to, or I should say, re-rising the idea of, but enshrining the greatness of an outlaw. And we kind of admire them to some degree. And we still have that. I think there's lots of negative effects in certain pockets of our culture. Like, I think there's still a madness that comes over certain young men, let's just say, and they admire certain people who are these ultimate nihilistic people, and then they go out and kill people, right? And so it's just a part of a very complex part of our culture that goes all the way back to the founding, or not even before the founding, you know, just the coming to America. And I think the noir is also a part of that broad mythological story.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I find it interesting, and like, so you're telling a story that in East Bay Confidential that's bringing back that it's still important, it's still part of the, you know, suburbs today now. And again, I think the East Bay part is really interesting, that we normally wouldn't think of, you know, the quote unquote gentrified West suburbs are going to have these seedy, bad things occurring, but they do happen, and they are something we need to think about and confront as a culture.
Sure. And, you know, I think most of the script was written back in 2021, right?
Yeah. Well, that's when I got it.
yeah, I think all that makes sense. It's part of kind of the general, a general American story that we tell. I will also say that at the time that I was writing and that you were reading and we were all working together to get the script prepared, as you remember, of course, that was a rough time.
Yeah.
And we were very locked down in COVID, and there was a lot of political things going on, and a lot of questioning of the authority of our or the validity of our institutions, the quality of some of our institutions,
Yeah.
and not to veer into politics, but to make a point. In 2016, there was questions about the validity of that election with the Russia interference stuff, and then similarly in 2020, there was questions on the other side about the validity of that election, and you might believe one or both of those were no good, or you might have faith in both of them. But the point is that a good portion of the country was at least asked to question whether or not we can trust election integrity in these different years. Portion
Yeah,
we were
absolutely.
all asked similarly, hey, how do we feel about other institutions, whether it is whether it be in politics or the media. And of course, that was a point in time when your more traditional media was kind of sparring with new media like podcasts, and we were also at that time facing questions around law enforcement institutions, and the movie isn't trying to take a stance necessarily on any of these things, except to just kind of capitalize on the fact that, hey, we're all being made to wonder about whether or not we can trust these various
Yeah.
and I think that was something that made it enjoyable to write, but also that's as much as the movie came from old crime films and old film noir, it came from just watching the news or just scrolling social media and just seeing what was happening. And like you mentioned, the Epstein stuff has been going on for a while, in various, from different angles and in different forms and everything. But a lot of that movie was just inspired by just how chaotic the world was and just how much our country was going through. And again, doesn't take a stance on anything specifically. It just tries to acknowledge that, hey, the individual person was kind of like thrown into a washing machine of crazy events and terrifying information, and a lot of people just didn't know what to think. And that kind of goes into the structure of the movie, which is also a very classic noir structure, telling the stories in a nonlinear way with a little bit of voiceover to help it out. Um, in the same way that the Miguel character is thrust into this world and has no idea what's going on to him, well, who's framed him up or why. The audience has presented the story out of order, or one character at a time, to put the audience in a similar state of I don't want to say confusion, because hopefully the movie's not confusing, but to put the audience in a state of at least not an omnipotent state. We're not watching with Miguel knowing everything that's going on. We're also kind of trying to piece things together. And that goes back, the Robert Mack movie, The Killers, right?
Yeah.
And that goes back a long time that's been happening. But I think all of this goes to it is all a dialogue, a national dialogue, going back as long as there have been movies, and then before there were movies, all other forms of art and entertainment, have they are a national dialogue that we share with one another, that asks who we are and why we're doing why we do the things that we do. And I think the movie, I don't know. Maybe it raises those questions. Maybe it's not. Maybe it was just fun to just have, cool.
Well, it's
cool
both, I think, right? could
Yeah.
definitely be both. I think
Sure.
one thing we can end the conversation on, because I want to talk a little bit about, before you go, indie filmmaking, but also just why this, again, coming back to why it's relevant and important. So you mentioned something, and I think it's a common thing we are very reluctant about today. We're cautious. Like we have our pincers up when we see this today, which is this kind of politicization of artwork, where it's like there's the message or something that's often, but then that leads to an idea that film can be separated from the emotional experiences you have of political, events.
Yeah.
But that's like takes away the whole point of art in a certain sense. Like art can give you an experience, and it's not about saying you should be pro the lockdowns or against the lockdowns, that you should be pro the mainstream media or against mainstream media. It's just about, in your case in particular, the Noir explores the corruption that is clearly there. And you definitely need to think and know that the corruption's there. To some degree, like what journalists do is try to reveal that in real time so that we all are aware of it. It's a pivotal American institution, journalism, because we need to have watchers watching the watchers type thing, right? And then you need watchers watching, whatever. So you would need to have that kind of thing. Film doesn't do that. It's not about journalism. It's about expressing an experience or showing an experience. I wrote a whole slew of plague stories at this time. And I think I gave you a copy of my magazine at that time. Like I put together a little magazine, and I wrote a whole bunch of short stories that were, it was basically futuristic in a sense, but in a realistic future where we were in continual lockdowns, where there would be like an unlockdown for a little while, and then they'd lock us back down because this plague was here. So the plague was this excuse to kind of keep us locked down and control us more. And then just all the things that happened. It were basically horror stories. It was the horror genre that I entered into, which I had never done before. And, so me as an artist that, as I said, nobody reads my stuff, but just my artistic aspect is this, I was always much more happy. I had like one of my characters I had a whole bunch of times when I was younger was like a treasure hunter, whose wife puts him on an adventure and he goes out, and it's like, so I was very happy, but the plague really changed me and the COVID lockdowns and COVID itself really changed me a lot. And it made me as an artist create much darker psychological thrillers and things that I never would have done. So my point is simply that one of the values of independent filmmaking is that it, I think, does get you closer to more artistic experiences that cinema, like Hollywood, could definitely do 100%. But I do think, like we said at the beginning, there is a kind of structure that they have to house it within in order to get the money back. Whereas with more independent films, you're able to explore things that you just wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah.
So
I agree with that. I agree too. I mean, films are a product of their time, the politics of the time, and how they made the filmmakers feel are going to be in the movie. And that's what makes classic film noir so interesting. Yeah. We love to talk about how, the femme fatale is a reaction to veterans returning from the war to find women in the workplace, right? Or we love to talk about, as you mentioned before, European directors fleeing Europe, coming to Hollywood, and their experiences with what was going on in Europe, and specifically in Germany, appearing in the movies. And similarly, veteran filmmakers leaving the war and then coming back and telling. So it's all that is like, and the second half, the 50s half of film noir is largely about the bomb and the communism and all that fear and everything. So you can't separate them. And in fact, it's much more enjoyable to watch the movies in their context and appreciate what they are reflecting. And I agree with you in the same way that you're kind of talking about what you wrote, which almost kind of reminds me of what is it, the Decameron. I feel like that period of time, 2020, 2021, 22, led me to write a more dark subject matter than I would otherwise write. You saw my first movie, Death Blood, which, despite its title, is about pizza and Bigfoot and, you know, silly stuff like that.
Yeah,
And
it's like a satire type fun film in a sense.
Yeah. And the one that I'm writing now is also very light and pleasant. And I, you know, think that that East Bay just happened to be written in a specific moment when things were heavy. I do think that and you mentioned lockdowns. Of course, East Bay Confidential doesn't have anything to do with the lockdowns, but it's a great example. As an audience member, my preference would be against watching a movie where the filmmaker said, "Hey, I hate lockdowns, and I'm going to make a movie to explain why." Or if the filmmaker said, "I love lockdowns, I'm going to make a movie to prove why they're good." Now, of course, every filmmaker has their right to do that. I'm less interested in watching that. I'm more interested in the filmmaker saying, "Hey, there were lockdowns and there were a lot of things going on. There was a lot of conflict. Here's a movie just about it generally."
Absolutely.
You know, of course, I think we love being asked the questions more than we maybe enjoy being told the answer.
J.R.R. Tolkien would never have wanted a movie of his films. He was explicitly against that because he was super pro imagination and he wanted people to imagine what an orc looked like based on his description. And one person's version would be very different than another's. And he liked that. That landscape of the individual imagination is different. In a sense, cinema takes all that away because it shows it to you, right? And but what it gives you, I think, in a difference is a kind of a unique juxtaposition of images where you come up with the if it's done well, like in your movie where you're coming up with this, what is what happens to the main character? I won't talk about that, but there's some aspect of like what's the final conclusion that you kind of have to come up with, and you kind of have to say, okay, here's what happens when the screen comes down and it's gone and that's it. Which, going back to what you said at the very beginning, I do think is one of the great things about film versus TV. Although, did we talk about that before we recorded? We might talk about that before we recorded, but we were talking about the difference between film and TV. And I think film does have a great ability to have this beginning, middle, and end, and then that's it. Whereas TV has a kind of serialized, maybe there'll be more, except I think modern times, the miniseries. So those are, when done well, like I mentioned before we started recording, Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn, which was turned into an HBO series, which I think is great. But it has a beginning. It is a kind of just long movie. But anyway, I just think all those things are great.
I agree. A miniseries is essentially a long film.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think it's an ongoing series, you know, serialized television, which is the preferred medium of the masses today. I think it is different. It does. I mean, it just goes. It could go on, and if it's popular, we'll give you another season. And you know, whether or not that season is going to be good, we'll see. But there is a succinctness to movies that I like. But I think for me, when it comes to film versus, there is film is going to have a very singular vision because it's, even though it's collaborative and there's a bunch of people working on it, there's generally still an author. It's some person who, hey, this is what I want to tell. Whereas a series, while guided by the creative
showrunner,
while guided by a showrunner, especially over a long period of time, it feels like you could feel the shift change, and episode to episode, you have to, the directors aren't expressing themselves, for example. You have to kind of stay on your brand and everything. And I think, for that reason, film kind of gives you the space to go a little wild, and hey, it's 90 minutes. And if you don't like that one, there's something else that you could watch after. So, I've always kind of gravitated a little more towards movies, but there's definitely some great television out there right now.
If you had any last thoughts, but I think the moral is go watch East Bay Confidential. It's on Amazon, and $2.99 to rent it, $9.99 to buy it, I believe, at the moment. But one, it's a great story. It's worth watching. You'll learn a lot, have a great experience. And I appreciate you talking about the micro budget of it to kind of, so people have the expectation of you're not going to see Brad Pitt toned like in Fight Club or something. It is a micro budget, but there's the storytelling abilities is something you'll never see anywhere else, I think. And that I think is worth seeing and experiencing and trying. And I had a great time watching it. I thought it was great. So,
well, I appreciate it, Kirk. Yeah, I would say, it's very trendy. A lot of people enjoy their local handcrafted breweries or whatever it is, your local beer, or you like your local, your kind of farmers market foods and honeys and things like that. Watching a micro budget film is that is supporting your local artists, and it is the handcrafted kind of homemade version of a movie. And yeah, it feels a little different. You kind of have to watch a handful of micro budget movies to get into the rhythm of the style and everything that we produce. But I would certainly recommend it. It's a new experience for a lot of people, and it's should be close to home, or it should feel closer to home than a bigger picture that comes from a big studio.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for joining. I appreciate the time you gave and all the interesting conversation about cinema, my favorite subject. So thank you.
Cool. Awesome, Kirk. Thank you. Love it, man.